Is the future of Dragon Ball games looking dim? Or are they glowing with Super Saiyan aura? Hey guys, it's Aceballs here, and we're here today to talk about the future of Dragon Ball games. Now, for a long time, Dragon Ball games seem to be releasing every other month or so. Hell, Japan is flooded with games from arcades to mobile devices. It's safe to say that Dragon Ball games are here to stay, and why wouldn't they be? Dragon Ball Z is probably one of the most recognizable IPs on the planet, reaching Super Mario status of popularity, mostly due to the fact that Dragon Ball as a whole has been around since the 80s, so that's plenty of time for an anime to gain traction, and look at it now. After 18-ish years, I think, I haven't done all the research, but around 18 years, the Dragon Ball franchise made its triumphant return with Dragon Ball Super, which inevitably means more content for fans to enjoy both in the anime and its video games. During those 18 years, when Dragon Ball went into a super long hiatus, we were limited on what game developers could and couldn't do because they wanted to stick to the source material as close as possible, with a few exceptions here and there. Looking at you, Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta and Broly and Bardock. But in true Blue Kaioken Goku fashion, those limits were broken. So much has happened and is currently happening in the anime that developers are going to have a field day with all the content they're going to create. Instead of rehashing the same content in a span of different games and at the same time make it different enough for the audience they are selling it to. Not only has the anime changed, but the video game industry has had a few transformations of its own lately. Get it? Never mind. Game development is getting more and more complex, and games are also getting more and more expensive to create. Thus, quality of content inevitably rises, so on and so forth. And we, as consumers, are taking notice of this. Now, you would think that game development getting complex equals the quality of games getting better, and that would apply to all the games, right? Well,
wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Proved.
There are plenty of bad games that have been recently released and plenty of good ones too, but hey, Sir Hyperion, whatever the hell your name is, what about anime games? Are those bad? Shouldn't you start with how games based on anime, primarily Dragon Ball, are actually performing with reviewers and such? Well, my smart-ass little viewer, the answer to those questions are, well, technically that is only a question that you can answer for yourself. We all have different tastes, so we're all not gonna like the same things and so far. But this isn't a video about what makes games good or bad. That's a video for another day. But if I try to be as subjective as possible and look at anime games as a whole and about what I have seen personally and what I have played personally, I'd say that around half of all anime console games are actually good. Now again, it is difficult to say something bold like that because it's not like I have played every single anime console game ever released, so in a way it's still just my opinion. But I have been around the virtual block, and video games are my thing, and anime are as well my other thing, and naturally I like to occasionally combine the two in an effort to create the best anime gaming experience possible. The problem with anime games is that sometimes when these games are made, the developers aren't necessarily fans of the series and aren't doing anything out of passion, so the game comes out this way, and the consumers notice it. We know when a game is made with love and attention to detail, and we especially notice when they aren't. Game developers that make anime games try to incorporate everything that fans love about the anime, and because of this, the games tend to lean more on the casual side of the gaming spectrum. This isn't to say that casual games aren't good or anything, because that is simply not true. I'm just saying that for the most part, anime games are being catered to fans of those anime, whether you think it's true or not. This applies to games from the Dragon Ball franchise, but recently there's been a strange influx of gamers wanting more out of these games and others like it. So without further ado, let's see how Dragon Ball games have been evolving and what potentially lies ahead in the future. And this isn't a history of video. It's an educated guess of where the games are going by following the patterns that the gaming industry and the franchise as a whole is taking. From the very beginning of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z games as a whole, it was very evident that these games sided more on the fun side than the fair side. By that I mean some characters in different games were cheaper or cheesier than others. Like Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta was pretty strong and a little cheap at times in a lot of the games, but that was to keep the lore of the Dragon Ball consistent throughout the anime and video games. Of course, Yamcha is gonna be a low tier character for the most part. It wouldn't make sense to make him equally as powerful as Vegeta. I'm sure most of you will agree that there are characters that are just better to use, but I guess you can say that about any game. But nonetheless, if you pick Gogeta and Budokai 3, I would tell you to get the hell out of my house with that shit. But nonetheless, early games of Dragon Ball were, in Super Smash Bros. Terms, for fun. That was the main premise of these games. Then again, that's the main purpose of any game, is to provide entertainment, but that's beside the point. I'm talking about every Dragon Ball game makes you feel so powerful, except Sagas. That was a train wreck in terms of making you feel powerful. But I still liked it for the most part. Just overall, not the best Dragon Ball Z games can offer. Anyways, Dragon Ball games attempt to be as fast-paced and as action-packed as possible in order to create a sense of empowerment for the player. Now, I'm not saying that this kind of game development isn't great or anything. If anything, I'm saying the opposite. I have countless memories of various playthroughs of many different Dragon Ball games. Most of them are great memories. The fights and animations have been epic, and on top of everything was on the disc, because DLC was never an option, at least in the past. Sure, some things about DLC are great, but when games are already a complete package, it's just a cheaper and, in my opinion, a better experience. Nowadays, games have paid DLC before the games are even out. Not that it's a bad thing, but personally, I think if you have content that is already finished, it should be released inside the disc. This is why I hate day one DLC crap. I even hate it when paid DLC is out a month later. Like, seriously, game developer, you're gonna cash grab people over a month of extra development? Okay, alright, rant over. My point is, because of DLC affecting the game industry in a major way, it's going to affect how Dragon Ball games are going to be released, and that is clearly evident in the Xenoverse series of games. With season passes and day one DLC plaguing our games, I'm afraid that a lot of our future titles will suffer the same fate. This brings me to my main point about the future titles in general. Like I have stated before, the games over the last couple of decades have been more about fun, and that's fine. We all have enjoyed them quite a bit, but for those looking for something more on the serious side of Dragon Ball, it had nothing to offer. Fast forward to 2017, the announcement for a competitive 2.5D fighter called Dragon Ball Fighters, the Z, was met with overwhelmingly positive feedback from both the anime community and the fighting game community. A game where balance within each individual character is the highest priority for the developers. Meanwhile, the goal to keep the fights fast-paced, stunningly beautiful, and exciting for the players is constantly achieved. Numerous awards were given to the game's demo this year. A demo, not even a third of what the game will be when fully finished. This seems to be a great direction for where future titles in the Dragon Ball franchise will be headed. A more competitive one, but at the same time retaining its new player-friendly aspect of Dragon Ball games we have all learned to love. Xenoverse, Xenoverse 2, and hopefully Xenoverse 3 will continue to provide the entertainment for its fans that aren't looking for anything too competitive. Not to say that Xenoverse isn't competitive, it can be, but player intervention is necessary to make things even for everyone, where in most cases the developers are constantly balancing the games themselves. I am honestly looking forward to the games like Fighters to relieve me from that competitive itch I've been building up all these years when only Smash Bros was feeling at the time. I know there are other amazing fighting games out there, but I need something that I'm already a huge fan of to fully embrace the game itself. So here's how I see it. Seeing such a positive reaction from multiple communities, Dragon Ball games in the future will definitely be developed for more than just the casual consumers and general fans of the series. At the same time, we will still have our Xenoverse 3s and other games like it because they are still undeniably fun and still sell really well. With everything that has been happening in Dragon Ball Super, more content is difficult not to see coming within the games themselves. We are seeing this already with the DLC in Xenoverse 2, as they have introduced brand new storylines and characters never seen in a real video game before. Imagine the enormous amount of content these developers can create now that the Dragon Ball universe is continuously expanding. We can finally move on from the usual 3 to 5 story arcs that we see in almost every Dragon Ball game. From the Saiyan Saga to Majin Buu, and sometimes GT and movie tie-ins, it's all rehashed content told before. Now, we can have all of that and a ton more. I won't be going into any spoilers about Dragon Ball Super just in case you haven't watched it, but it is safe to say that Dragon Ball as a whole is never gonna die, or at least not in the near future. There's plenty of content for developers to work with, and it should come standard within the Dragon Ball games, along with the old sagas that we know and love. It should only be included as DLC as a last resort And I'm talking like the content in the DLC is super last minute, only because it's so caught up with the show or the anime or the manga. It needs to be caught up, guys. This brings me to my last point. I like to take a minute and talk about the DLC within the Dragon Ball games. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of DLC, especially when a game literally just came out. I'm also not a fan of developers and publishers purposely holding back content just to nickel and dime you after you purchase their game at full price. But I am a fair consumer. I can see how things that can be considered extra would be fair to charge for. The problem with things like that is that they start to split the player base into those that have and those that do not. Not everyone has the extra cash to shell out for the super deluxe day one ultra special extra premium characters edition for these games, so not everyone will get the full experience the developers intended. I am actually hoping that other developers and publishers take Respawn's Titanfall 2's approach when handling DLC, but with a few minor changes. I hope that all content pertaining to characters and stages and movesets and everything that a player needs to fully enjoy the game will come free of charge. And everything cosmetically changing, like extra costumes, can either be purchased with real world currency or earned within the game itself. Now, I know this isn't particularly very enticing for the publishers, as they would be losing potential income, but Dragon Ball games do well enough on their own regardless of DLC being present. Developers shouldn't take this approach for the sake of potentially losing money, but more for the good of its fans and its relationship with them. Keeping a community happy and healthy is key for any game to thrive. As much as I hope to see this model come true, I can only say that I am cautiously optimistic for how DLC will be handled in the future. If anything, they will continue with the season passes and day one edition crap, but who knows? Maybe something will change in the minds of these developers and publishers. But now that I've given you my take on the not so distant future of our beloved Dragon Ball games, what do you think we will see? Do you think there's a positive future for Dragon Ball games? There is literally so much to talk about and a lot of things that were left out of this video, like the amount of characters we can expect in the future, but I only left that stuff out because the video would be longer than it already is, and I wanted to focus on what was more important and the immediate issues. But other than that, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I hope to speak with you again soon on the next episode of Hyperion Arcade. Bye, guys.